So, hello everyone. No, we're not live yet. Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar From Strategy to Spend, how companies are preparing for CSRD compliance. We're just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to join, but we're very excited to have you with us for the next 45 minutes as we dive into the topic of CSRD. There's a lot to talk about. During the session, we'll share valuable insights, key takeaways, and recent findings from a survey we conducted, and also how to overcome those challenges that were highlighted by survey participants. We very much look forward to exploring this journey with you. Um, and yeah, I think we can go on with the introductions as people keep on joining us. So I'm Tiziana Antonietti. I'm a manager in the advisory team at Novata. I specialize in regulatory alignment and reporting, and I have 3.5 years of experience in the sector. Before joining Novata, I worked at S&P Global, where I supported investors in implementing data-driven solutions, sustainability, data, financial data to meet their objectives, and I also helped with regulatory alignment and reporting. I'm very thrilled to be here today to share the insights, and I'm here with my brilliant colleague, Caitlin. I'll pass it over to you.
Hi there. Good morning for those that are joining us from Eastern Standard Time. I'm in New York today. I'm Dr. Caitlin Pentafalo, and I lead our metrics and regulations team at Novata. So we're in charge of bringing regulations onto a platform like CSRD, overseeing our other regulatory solutions like SFDR, and any metrics, whether those are GRI, SASB, IFRS, you name it. Before joining Novata, I had a career in indicator-based impact assessment, working in the federal government, working with nonprofits, and also working in other SaaS products and also in consultancy. So I'm really excited about this, brings together a couple of my interests, working in research and diving into the nitty-gritty behind technology.
So, what's on the menu today? Obviously, we're going to focus on CSRD and a survey we conducted on this important topic. We'll start by presenting the survey findings and then dive deeper into the key hurdles you might face when implementing CSRD, double materiality, data collection, and a few of those topics. Throughout, we'll share practical tips to make this session as useful as possible for you. We'll also discuss the financial impact of compliance and wrap up by exploring how technology can support with streamlining your processes and your compliance journey. There will be time for questions at the end, so please don't hesitate to save those for the end. And without further ado, let's jump into it. Back to you, Caitlin. Oh no, actually, sorry, we have a first poll. So I just wanted to take the temperature of the room, and I'd like to know from you how confident you feel when it comes to implementing CSRD and reporting. So, just for reference, super confident means that you, on top of everything, you have implemented processes and teams are well prepared to meet obligations. Pretty confident would mean that you're making progress, but there might still be a few gaps and areas of uncertainty on how to address these. Not confident means that you're likely at the beginning of the journey or struggling with complexity of the requirements, and unsure means that you're still struggling to figure out what CSRD means for your organization. So I'll let you just vote a minute or two. Okay, so we see that 30% are pretty confident, 30% not confident at all, and then a lot of you are unsure. Now, it reflects a lot the survey findings, and I hope that going out of this webinar, you will find a little bit more confidence when it comes to implementing CSRD and aligning with reporting obligations. And now I'm going to hand it back to Caitlin.
Thanks. So before we get into this, I want to talk a little bit about why we did the study. I think first and foremost, there wasn't one like this out there. So really looking to get a pulse on how people are feeling. So many clients also wanted insights into how others are managing CSRD compliance. A big unknown when you launch something so big, I've been calling it kind of the biggest sustainability regulation in the past 25 years in a generation. And so lots of unknowns out there. And with that, lots of gaps in existing information. So lots of articles explaining what CSRD is, how, to start thinking about it, but not a lot on the practical side of implementing it, what it means, and what it's going to cost. So, our study really looks to dive into a couple key questions. What are those costs associated with CSRD? What can people expect? And how is that budget likely going to be split among tech providers, legal, assurance, and then all those other services that come with it? So, when we look at our respondent profile, we had a good breakdown in terms of type of companies, primarily private companies, 20% public, and then a few investment firms. Across geographies, 80% of our respondents were headquartered in Europe. And then looking at sizes, about a third had revenues coming over 500 million euros. And then revenues really did span all kinds of revenue categories. Looking at the graphic that you'll see on the right, in terms of our top five most represented sectors, top there coming in was manufacturing at 25%, finance at 17, followed by professional services, technology, and energy. So good diversity in terms of what's being represented overall within this study. Lastly, just to talk about reporting timelines, because it's something we're going to hear a lot about within this study, just about half of our respondents plan to report in 2026 and 2025 data. So that's a big cohort coming up with lots of pressure, lots of strain that we're going to hear a lot about. And then 20% aim to report in 2025, and then 24% still thinking through and figuring out what that reporting timeline is going to be. So overall, as we think through this survey, what that means, what it's going to look like, one, what are the main challenges that companies are going to face? And then two, how do companies feel on their progress for CSRD? That's something really that we had nagging questions about. And it's something that if you're here, you're tuning in, you want to know about as well, that we're going to get into. If you don't mind going to this next slide, a little bit now on CSRD 101. What is it? So CSRD stands for Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and this is a major European legislation introducing the most extensive sustainability reporting requirements. This is going to affect 50,000 European companies, and then 10,000 of those are going to also come from outside the EU. So for those with other footprints, you could have a headquarters somewhere else, but then a significant presence in the EU are also going to be affected. So at least 10,000 companies also affected outside. In terms of that phased implementation we talked about, we're going to see this in a bit of a rolling effect with those biggest companies, so those that would have been affected by NFRD really hitting that first round. But then that rolling effect is going to take effect over those next 4 years. You're really going to start to see that. So smaller companies over coming years. And then you're also going to see new standards being developed by EFRAG right now and then taking effect as those come into focus. Something we're going to hear a lot about, especially from Tiziana, is going to be double materiality. And that's really foundational into how this reporting takes shape. This reporting is really guided by double materiality, or what you'll hear us talk about as DMA. Companies really must report only on material information, and this comes in two parts. So the first being impact materiality. So you must first assess the company's impact on the environment and on society, and then on financial materiality. So evaluating how ESG factors affect the company's finances. And so in knowing all of this, materiality considerations must also take into account the company's value chain. So in not talking about supply chain, but value chain, we're also encompassing both upstream and downstream effects. And that's why in the EFRAG language that comes with CSRD, you're going to hear us using that value chain language, and that's what's reflected in the regulation overall. So zooming out a little bit, we have really extensive sustainability reporting requirements. We've got double materiality at its core, and we're also talking about value chain effects that are going to span both upstream and downstream, making this a pretty broad and quite encompassing piece of legislation. This would also explain why just about half of people that we surveyed are feeling somewhat or very confident. That means the other half probably not feeling that confident, which brings us to some of these findings that we have today. Tiziana, if you don't mind going on to the next one. We've got kind of our first graphic here, and this is our top challenges that we found. Here, we asked all companies what their top challenges were when it comes to CSRD compliance. CSRD and double materiality, these are relatively new for many organizations and really requires a shift in perspective and also calls for a lot of cross-functional collaboration. With this, we're also expecting lots of challenges and just a different way of thinking about things and a different way of doing business. It's not just what's affecting the financial bottom line, but it's also about what you're also coming at that other perspective of the other impact materiality. So going through the data today and what we're really going to spend time talking about, we're going to spend time on these top three bars that you see coming in, and that's data collection and management. This was 68%. So 68% of companies stated that data collection and management is the biggest challenge faced when navigating CSRD compliance. Coming in at number two, not that far behind at 63%, is understanding their regulatory reporting requirements. And then just about half listed double materiality assessment. So these really make up our top three. And this is what we're going to spend most of our time today focusing on. Going into the next, I'm going to talk about that number one most nagging issue is data collection and management. So how did this get top billing and what makes it so complex? So from where I sit, I lead the team that brought our 1100 plus data points to platform, that broke down that regulation, that spends time with FREG, with the people that are also behind it, and really understands that regulation super well, as does Tiziana's team. But really, what's behind that? What's driving this cause for concern? Number one, CSRD is a team effort. So unlike, when we see some other voluntary reporting requirements that are asking for, some tidbits here and there, or maybe you're really focused on scope one, two, and three, CSRD more so is really a team effort. And so I would say teams are expecting to draw from a broad range of functions across the organization, much further than beyond environmental data. You're going to hear about workforce, value chain, community. These can all be in scope. Both internal and external stakeholders are also going to be called upon in a really significant way. So assurance providers, counsel, both inside and outside of the organization, and technology partners, you're all going to need to lean on them and engage them as early as possible. So CSRD is not just something that, you're calling on your sustainability team once off or leaning on them during that reporting season. It's really going to need to engage a pretty broad group, and not just, 2 weeks out from that deadline. It's really going to lean in and call for a pretty big time engagement. My next point is that it's also going to be in a language that's foreign to us all, unless you're also familiar with some 10K filings, but that's XBRL. So that stands for Extensible Business Reporting Language, and that's a requirement in order to submit to the European Single Access Point, also sometimes abbreviated to ESAP. And this is a language that makes a human readable digital tags and then brings it into a machine readable, also structured data format. It's pretty cool, but it means that as everything goes into the European Single Access Point, it's going to be both machine and human readable. It means that you can't just kind of do this on your own and then put it into the Single Access Point, which is the submission requirement. You're going to have to bring that all together, use this, it is an open source software, but it is very hard to implement. So this means that your data has to be really well managed, really well aligned, and apply this technology to it. And then last point, CSRD is not a one-time engagement. You can't just meet this requirement, check the box, and move on. It's going to be an annual thing. So for those that are well aware, especially in EMEA, where we're really seeing people coming to the table and asking us for support and looking for technology providers, they are well aware of the fact that this is going to be well embedded into their business for the foreseeable future. So it's not just a one-time thing. It's going to be happening on an ongoing basis. So this means that adopting these systems, embedding them into your practice is something that is here to stay. So this means that having those practices well in place is something that is much needed, and people are taking the time to invest in these practices and adopt them now. On our next slide here, I'll talk a little bit about data collection, starting to think about reporting requirements and what makes this so complicated. Not so complicated that it can't be broken down and really well understood, but really getting into the heart of what's there. So what is being collected? In ESRS, there are 12 documents. 2 are cross-cutting. These are 2 cross-cutting ESRS standards. 1 is general requirements and 2 is general disclosures. ESRS 1 is general requirements of content, sustainability reporting, nothing there that really needs to be reported on. But in 2, this is a core set of metrics that everyone needs to report on. After those 2, there's going to be 10 topical standards that are going to break down across E, S, and G. And then in this table, I brought over one of our tables of data points. You're going to see those 1,100 plus data points that you can see broken down across climate change, pollution, to circular economy, to affected communities, to business conduct, and what that really looks like. So as these data points are translated, these break out across all different kinds and types of data points, of inputs that require lots of different interventions from all different kinds of teams. Of course, this 1135 number is not required for everybody. This is all subject to your double materiality assessment. As you can see, my quote pulled out from our larger report, I would expect on very much on average 400 to 650 for a mid-range, mid-sized company. We are often seeing 800 at the very highest end, maybe 900 data points. All depends on the scope, the size, the footprint, and the complexity, number of subsidiaries that are involved. And this can, of course, vary. So can't give you a number of what is the number that my company is going to have to report on because, of course, it is all subject to DMA. So everything is in flux. But again, there's a lot going on that makes data collection and management quite a complicated process, not one that can't be understood, can't be broken down, and can't be well supported, but it is a lot to get your head around.
Thank you so much,
Moving
Caitlin.
on, passing it over to Tiziana now.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. So I'm going to take you through the next two challenges. Now, regulatory requirements ranked as the second biggest hurdle. And why is this a challenge? Now, the first reason is that it is extensive. As Caitlin already said, CSRD is, of course, only one law, but there are so many different reporting standards, and all of these reporting standards introduce new concepts and new language that we might not be familiar with yet. The language in which these ESRS are written is not always in layman's terms, so it might take a long time to get familiarized with this. The depth and the breadth of the regulation is unprecedented, so it is just going to be a very tough thing to wrap your head around, especially in this first and second reporting cycles. Another reason that I'd like to talk about is the scope of companies that might be new to ESG reporting. Now, a lot of companies that are in scope for CSRD have maybe not produced any ESG report, have not collected data to that extent, and have not yet had the experience of having to assure that data because assurance used to be something we used to do, of course, for financial data, but having assurance on ESG data is something that we might be new to, and that introduces new complexities as well. Um, so how can you get over these hurdles? I really want to give you a few practical tips so that you can manage this better. Now, although legal advisors can help with regulatory requirements, in our survey, we found that only 36% of respondents had engaged with legal advice, particularly on the question of CSRD. So, our first tip is please do engage with your legal advisors as soon as possible because companies need to figure out whether they are in scope, whether they want to report on a consolidated level or not. And there are so many questions that legal advisors will be able to assist with. They will help establish clear reporting boundaries, which are fundamental to the part of CSRD compliance. Now, once that is established and you know when exactly you need to report, internal resources such as general counsel and compliance functions should be leveraged and should be encouraged to learn about CSRD compliance. Of course, we recommend upskilling all relevant functions, which might include audit, finance, procurement, sustainability, legal and audit, and so many more, which could be relevant to CSRD. So we do recommend giving training to these functions so that they feel engaged and that they start learning about these new concepts. And then finally, at Novata, we always recommend companies to involve someone from the legal and compliance functions, to involve those functions closely into the DMA process so that they remain engaged throughout the process and can not only help with things such as the DMA, but also implementation and making sure that the company stays on the right track when it comes to regulatory requirements as well. The third biggest hurdle or challenge when it comes to CSRD was the DMA. Now, again, I want to explain a little bit around why this is so complex. And the DMA requires company to identify and assess actual impacts, risks, and opportunities, not only for the company, but across the whole value chain. Now, as you can imagine, this can be a very long and complex process. It can go anywhere from 2 to 4 months or even longer for very big organizations. Um, this exercise is not only very big and prescriptive, it also involves collaborating with many different stakeholders, both externally when you engage with stakeholders to assess the materiality of IROs, but also internally to get the information you need to assess materiality, to get the right data that you need. So, this all takes time and introduces complexity into that process. And then finally, another thing, we've heard it, we're going to hear it again, the value chain. The DMA involves assessing IROs across the whole value chain. And this is not something that a lot of companies will have a lot of experience with. How to overcome those challenges. A few practical tips. Start early. It's an obvious one, but we always keep saying the earlier you start engaging all of your relevant partners, engaging the organization, the better. Form a CSRD task force is the second. Now, the CSRD task force, that will be people from different functions, audit, legal, procurement, sustainability, finance, and all of these people will be relevant throughout the DMA. As Caitlin explained, you will need data from different departments, not just once you start reporting, but also throughout that DMA process. And having that monthly meetup between the different functions will help you streamline that process. Then a high level gap analysis can help you understand where you stand, where your strengths and weaknesses are, and really get you in the right mindset before you even start the DMA. And to make sure that you cover the entire value chain, you need to understand how that value chain looks like. So we really recommend doing a value chain mapping exercise where you map each step of the value chain and how you interact with different stakeholders throughout that value chain. And that will really put you on the right track for the DMA. Finally, one thing that I do want to stress, do not try to do this on your own. If there's an issue with the DMA at any point, you might risk having to do certain parts of the DMA again. So please make sure that you have the right partners and the right support needed for this exercise. Second poll. So, checking if you're still there, I just want to see where you think you are with the CSRD budget. Now, do you think you're on track? Have you spent less than you thought you would, or have you maybe blown the budget? Would be great to hear your thoughts before we dive into that part of the survey. Just going to give you another couple of seconds before we move on. Okay, so 31% are on track, 8% have spent less than they thought, 15% have blown the budget, and 46% haven't spent anything yet. Well, that's very interesting to see that many of you are maybe preparing, and I think that we've given you a few valuable tips on how to prepare in the right way. So I'm very happy about this result. Moving on to the costs. Now, a big part of the survey actually was around the idea of costs, and significant financial investment might be required to comply with the CSRD, the FRAG. FRAG, so the group that wrote these reporting standards, did say that this would be an expensive exercise. And for these companies which were in scope of NFRD, so the regulation which preceded the CSRD, EFRAG said that costs would be estimated at 287,000 euros one off, with an additional 320,000 occurring annually. So for these very, very big companies, the costs would be very big. Now, this is something that we picked up in our survey as well. Overall, 51% of respondents expect to spend over 100,000 annually on compliance. Now, of course, you can break this down into different sectors and company sizes. For companies reporting in 2025 to 2026, the number of companies which spend more so more than 100,000, jumps to 66%. Why is this the case? This is because these companies tend to be much bigger, and so they would spend more on all of these individual items. To give you a small breakdown of the cost, you can look at this graph we have on the right-hand side. 22% of companies anticipate costs exceeding 250,000. 29% expect to spend between 100 and 250,000. 12% between 50 and 100, and 37% expect to spend less than 50,000. Now, everything is dependent on a lot of factors. One of the biggest factors, and something that we looked at in our survey, was company size. And we know that larger companies have higher costs, but what exactly did we find? A large company in this survey was defined as a company with more than 1,000 full-time employees, and anything else would be defined as a smaller company. Roughly 90% of large companies expect to spend more than 50K on assurance, 80% of large companies more than 50K on data collection, and roughly 60% of large companies expect to spend more than 50K on DMA. Um, so that is very interesting. Another thing that I wanted to pick up here was that across, both larger and smaller companies, the cost distribution remained the same. So assurance was top, then no data assurance was top, then data collection and management, and then DMA. So whether a company was big or small, we had approximately the same breakdown. And another thing that I would like to mention is, why is this the case? Now, usually bigger companies have more entities in scope, and that drives the cost for DMA, for assurance, for data collection as well. So that's something that you need to consider. Then larger companies are more likely to have complex value chains. This is not always the case, but if you have a huge company, you might have two or three or four different business models, and that will complexify all of the different elements, including assurance and DMA as well. However, and skipping just to this slide, larger companies might also have more resources and greater experience in data collection. They might have already reported, they might have bigger sustainability teams. So all of this can help mitigate those challenges. And now I'm handing it back to Caitlin to talk more about technology.
Thanks, Tiziana, and that was comprehensive. This is one of my favorite graphics from a report, and this goes into which type of service providers has your organization engaged for CSRD compliance, and then it's going to show the breakdowns in those colored bars based on the comprehensive ESG reporting, limited, or no formal ESG reporting. And so what you can see is that in that row at the top, sustainability consultants were the top reported cost, no matter the level of ESG reporting experience. And now there are sustainability consultants in the room with us right now. In fact, even on the line, sustainability consultants that I know and love. And so there's certainly a place and a budget for sustainability consultants. And we're definitely seeing a need for that in our environment right now. We're in uncharted territory. People don't have enough upskilling in terms of their teams, and their needs are definitely big and apparent. ESG teams are being tasked in ways that they've never really felt before. And so you can see that no matter where they are on that ESG reporting spectrum, they are spending 70% across the board. Where you're going to see those disparities is then in legal advisors. People are spending a lot when they do have comprehensive ESG reporting in place. And then that amount spent is really tapering off when you see no formal ESG reporting. So we are going to see the disparities there. Things that I do want to highlight, though, is that it's going to look quite similar again when we jump down to technology providers. So technology providers are going to play a pivotal role in CSRD preparation and submission, even though just about 30% of those surveyed have engaged a provider so far. So it's actually quite neck and neck there at 32%, 26, and 29%, really quite even, no matter the level of ESG reporting. And so I want to talk about some of the ways, that I think technology is going to play such a pivotal role. And we've really really talked about that quite a bit. So data point management. So if you are talking about 600 data points, that's quite significant. How are those going to be managed? How are they going to be maintained and assigned across so many teams and so many people? Data collection and aggregation. So whether it is text responses, how are those going to be pulled in across subsidiaries? But if it is numeric responses and quantitative disclosures, how are those going to be aggregated? So that's another role that technology can play. In terms of disclosure prep, getting that ready, whether it is XBRL or submitting to the European Single Access Point. Those are things that are also where is a role that technology can play. And then added to that, the role that you're going to need year over year. I think those are ones that we're going to see a really big role for technology in this space. So even though you're going to see tech about fourth down the list, the role of tech, I think, in CSRD compliance can't be understated. So that's something that we're really expecting to be quite significant for us here. Tiziana, if you don't mind going to what I think is going to be one of our final talking slides, I just want to give some commentary on the long run. So I think, there's a lot said certainly in the EU right now for those that have seen the Draghi report or the potentially proposed omnibus legislation that I don't want to get into because of the massive potential changes there. But the objective of regulation shouldn't be to overburden companies with the reporting effort and the cost or to be seen in this kind of punitive light. But regulations like CSRD seek to build a standardized language for sustainability in finance and investment. And then from this, companies can draw meaningful insights into the impact their activities are having on their emissions, their environments, their communities. And so compliance to regulation is a secondary. Observing and then changing business behavior to become more sustainable, that is what we should think of as the outcome. So if DMA is helping us to mitigate risk, this can help you identify opportunities and then trends within the market. All of this is something that we see at Novata is driving value. And so if this seems daunting, Novata is one such option that, armed with the tech, the know-how, the experience, we're definitely here to help usher you through this new era of regulation. So those are, despite many daunting challenges, those are some positives that I would definitely end on. I think on our final slide, we're going to use the poll as a bit of a question, but if that note of optimism has spurred you to see a demo, do respond here in the chat and we will get you set up with that.
And I think with that, we can open the Q&A as well. So I see there is a fantastic question from Katie. Thanks, Katie. Do you have any guidance on how best to convince my executive team to invest in CSRD compliance? I love that question. This is definitely a concern because a lot of people who come to us, they would be sustainability professionals or they would, look into the topic of CSRD for their organization, but it's difficult for them to get buy-in. Now, something that you can do is start with something like a gap analysis. This you can do in-house, you can do with a consultant. Usually it's an exercise that, could take you like anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to have like a high level overview of might be required versus where your organization stands. And for most organizations, you will have a massive amount of gaps. Now, if this is not enough, you could also run a webinar on CSRD and or a workshop and then workshop it out and try to get both a bit of upskilling but also show how big of a challenge it would be. And then, of course, if you would need more support, we would always be here to perhaps set up a meeting and talk leadership through, what it actually means and how challenging it might be. So we're always here to support you with this tasks of convincing your leadership. But I don't know how you would answer that question, Caitlin. Do you have any other ideas?
I think that's a great one. I think early activities like gap analysis can really point it out, and I think it's really tough to go with alternatives like not investing in CSRD compliance because we do know what the alternatives are, which can be penalties depending in terms of where you are. And so there are certainly opportunity costs of not investing. And so that means more and more time spent. So we also know anecdotally of people that have, nope, I want to do my DMA this way and I want to go about it, in a certain way. And then they actually spent double to have that redone and then come back. So oftentimes making the investment up front does pay out. So I would say, you know, armoring yourself with this is a good way to do it. And I agree with your answers there, Tiziana.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to take the second question, and please feel free to add additional questions. We have another couple of minutes as well for that. So, second question was, does my firm need to engage a sustainability consultant if we invest in a technology provider like Novata? Again, really great question. And um, technology is going to be instrumental to your success, and there's so much data involved that I cannot overstate the importance of technology. Spreadsheets and, collecting data manually is only going to get you so far. And from that point of view, engaging technology providers is really crucial. However, it's not the be all end all, and where sustainability consultants can be valuable is in doing things like the DMA, and that is going to be crucial because not only the sustainability data, but also the DMA as a process will need to be evaluated and assured by audit partners. So that's why we recommend also engaging sustainability consultants, especially in the first, maybe even second reporting cycles, just to be on the safe side there and not having to redo any assessments afterwards. And then again, legal advice is really not something that you should take lightly. So unfortunately, you should be thinking of engaging more partners rather than less for these very difficult tasks. Um, so yeah, maybe a question I'd like to ask you, Caitlin. Where does Nevada shine in comparison to others? I really love that. Very positive question.
Yeah, that's a great one. Tiziana, do you know what I'm going to say? I'm I'm going to say in our data point development and in our guidance. So this is something that we have been developing for no fewer than 10 months. And so we have a very dedicated team. And I mean, the team only focuses on this. There's nothing else that they do besides learn and craft data points, our question format, and then developing our guidance. And so, in terms of what that means, is that within our platform, you're going to go into your data points. You're going to go through the data point selection process. You can also upload from your IG3 and go through that. And then once you're in there, the way that we've set it up is that you're going to see the name, the reference number exactly as IG3 and FRAG have recommended. And then we've broken it down and what one of my team members would call laymanizing that guidance. So we've broken it down into what that means and what your team really needs to answer. So knowing that not everyone is going to have that level of familiarity with the FRAG regulation, we've spent that time in the document so that you don't have to. And so we're going to interpret that. We're going to call out the input type, what it's asking for, what questions it relates to. And then we're going to bring forward the parts of that guidance text and put that directly within our platform. So you're not going and like, okay, now I have to go and find that particular annex and I have to go and understand what that definition is, what ISRS that connects to, and then find the IRO and then understand that table. We've done that. So that's going to shine directly in the platform. And then where we do want to point to exactly where we found that, we'll take the hyperlink and that hyperlink will take you to that exact point in the PDF, not just that generic part of the entire PDF. We really want to point you there and literally guide you to it. And so that's something I'm really proud of as the supervisor and manager of that team is that we've spent so much time understanding each and every ask, with each and every edit of every turn they made, every kind of revision, we changed ours. When they changed their reference numbers, we changed ours. And so the work that we did with product to make sure that our product matched exactly what FRAG was asking, I think is when that's really going to show up for our clients is that we really tried to make that mirror. And so what that means is it's going to be kind of a seamless interface that's going to walk you through every step of what's being collected, what you need to do next, and it's not going to kind of leave you in the dark. It's not just going to be this black box saying like, okay, plop some information in here. It's going to be the exact table that's going to match the exact table that was called for. Where it was asking for this, the how and the whether, it's going to split that out into two questions guiding you to each input. And so if it sounds like it's something that I'm passionate about, it's because I, coach the team on how to deliver that passion into each of those guidance points and those data points for collection. And it's something that we care about because we want our clients to have that experience. So when I tell our team, Novata is not going to be beat on our data points and our guidance, it's because of the amount of time, the dedication we spent learning that, understanding it, breaking it down, and translating it into platform.
I love the passion here. So I'm very excited about that too. I think a few, very briefly, a few other things that I think are special is that we have everything end to end in house. So we have consultants with over a decade of experience working on such projects as part of our team. So you could do anything in house, including the DMA, and then actually collect and report the data and help you find the narrative around that data. But also technologically, we have a space for the auditor within the platform. So that means that you won't spend that much time engaging with the auditor because the auditor can go into the platform and understand how you came to a certain solution. And then you can also do XBRL tagging within our platform, which is amazing because you'd have to use a separate solution for that if you weren't doing that at all. So yeah, that's a few things. Just checking if there are more questions.
I think that that final part of your answer, Tiziana, is a great response to our next question. Once you consult with Novata, what could be the benefit in terms of assurance with the final output of CSRD? And I would say the insurance store. So there is an or assurance provider specific login that they would have access to that. And so rather than, having a offline only version that you would then take to your assurance provider, there's going to be a way for your assurance provider to go in to the platform and then do that there. And so that's something that's unique and being finalized right now. And so all that final output can be assured within platform. So they'll have access to see the data in a read-only auditable format before it's submitted and to be able to leave comments. And so that's something that we developed from the time we were developing all of our roles and permissions. So all of that consideration was baked into the platform as it was being developed with our product teams.
And also, as Caitlin already mentioned, whenever a data point is updated by FRAG, Caitlin's team would update that. So, it'd be much more likely, 100% sure that if you answer that question the correct way, it will be assurance ready for sure. So that's something that distinguishes us from other providers as well. And also we have professionals working who've worked in the industry for a long time. We have assurance partners and legal partners who looked at the platform. We co-developed it with them. So we really do everything we can and think of the auditor a lot, to make sure that you're ready if you use our platform. Were there any other questions? I think that was it for today. Thank you so much for joining the webinar. This was fantastic, and we hope to do more of these in the future. And I think with that, we all finish 2 minutes early, and I hope you have a lovely Friday and a great weekend.